Fred, one of the areas you talk about is blockchain and some of the innovation that's happening there. One of the challenges, of course, in blockchain or even more broadly Bitcoin, especially in fintech, is there's a government and regulatory side. We can beat our heads against the wall and build the best blockchain Bitcoin implementation that's possibly available, and if the United States or European Union or whatever shuts this down, it's not going to go anywhere. So how important is having that kind of civic engagement? How much do you talk, like, because traditionally tech tends to disengage on the politics and civic side. Maybe talk about some of the balance that you see there, because I know that you're very active in pushing the regulatory side for blockchain and Bitcoin.
I think I'd like to separate, just to answer this question articulately, I'd like to separate Bitcoin and blockchain. To me, Bitcoin is the first major app that was built on top of the blockchain. But the blockchain itself, as I said before, I see as this sort of massive peer-to-peer open source database that runs on, lots of computers at the same time. So it has all of the same architectural benefits of the internet. You could take out one computer, you don't lose any data. You've got, it's all sort of, cryptographically rich in terms of protecting the privacy of the information and all that kind of stuff. So I think that as a platform to build interesting stuff on top of that has nothing to do with money is very interesting. And that, I don't think we have a lot of regulatory issues with right now. The regulatory issues are all, in my mind, around Bitcoin because it is money and because bad people are using it to move money to do bad things, whether it's terrorism or drug dealing or arms dealing or even worse than all of those things, like trafficking in human beings. I mean, it's awful stuff. And you can't let bad people do bad things. You have to regulate your money systems so that you stop that kind of activity. So it's natural that Bitcoin needs to be regulated. What I've been advocating for on that front is that we should regulate Bitcoin in the same way that we regulate PayPal and that we regulate, wire transfers and we regulate bank transfers and other things that bad people have tried to use over the years to move money, and that we shouldn't try to make a special case out of Bitcoin because it's really no different. And I think that argument will win over time, but it requires a lot of education. Because people see bad people using Bitcoin and they think there's something special about it. And the only thing that's special about it is that it's been kind of a gray market thing or even a black market thing for a long time, and it hasn't really come into legitimacy until recently. And so I think as people start to understand that, the regulators will, I think, do the right thing, but it definitely requires a lot of work and education.
And so what broadly about, kind of that civic engagement, like how do you suggest people get started? I know you and Ron Conway talked a little bit about this yesterday. When we think about how tech, in kind of Marc Andreessen's words, is eating the world, software is eating the world, you've got massive fights between Uber right now and a variety of the different cities as they try and go into because of how they're disrupting, overplayed word, but in their case, very true, existing transportation systems and very heavy kind of political fights. What are your thoughts in terms of people who work in tech and getting engaged and fighting for the things they think are important?
Well, first of all, I think it's tough to ask the entrepreneurs to do it because the entrepreneurs are building companies and they can't spend all their time, dealing with government and governmental officials and things like that. And so I do think it's a role for the venture community to play because we don't have to do anything. Basically, the dirty little secret is that we don't work. So we just write checks.
I know there's a whole bunch of VCs in here right now who are like, oh.
Well, compared to what entrepreneurs do and the teams that they put together, we have certainly, less pressing, things on our calendar. So I do think that there's a role for the venture community in being an advocate for our portfolio companies. And we can walk in and say, we have 6 Bitcoin companies, and so we're here to talk to you about all of them and how we think you ought to think about regulating them. Or we have 6 peer-to-peer sharing economy companies, and here's how you ought to think about regulating the sharing economy. And look, the truth is that there are things that Airbnb has facilitated that aren't good things. They won't admit it. I'm not an investor in Airbnb, so I can be honest about it, but there are people who live in New York in apartment buildings next door to an apartment that's getting rented out every night on Airbnb, and they got random people walking through their hallway every day who they don't know, who are staying up late, making a lot of noise, and that's not actually a great thing. I think we ought to admit that it's not a good thing, and we ought to try to have a conversation with people about how we can, put the proper controls in place so that these services are used in ways that are helpful and are not used in ways that are harmful. And I think the same thing is true about some ride sharing. There are examples of things that have gone on in ride sharing that probably aren't great either. So I don't like it when people sort of in my business or in the startup sector are blindly like, we're disruptors and screw those people, we're making the world better and just get off my back. It's not really true. There's always some harm that's created, when you build something new, and it does, I think, make sense to have a conversation about what the rules of the game should be to make sure that, things are safe and things are done properly.
You, Ted, spend a lot of time helping in Waterloo, pushing the Waterloo story when you're on the road, all of those pieces. What's your thoughts on this front? Do you tend to try and stay out of the fray on a lot of this stuff because you're gonna be busy building your company and you leave the rest for Ian Klugman to go fight, or I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too.
Yeah, I think like for us, we're super busy. If we get to the point where we're starting to cause harm and we need to become part of these conversations, then we'll do that more and more. But yeah, like at this point, we're just trying to like compete at the highest level, and that takes a lot of time. So we're focused on that.